Hello everyone, I am Jyoti Bhoom and in this video we are going to discuss a topic structural geology. Structural geology deals with the large scale features of rock masses such as their size and shape, their attitude in space, their relationships with each other as seen in the field of their outcrops, that is those portions of rock formations which are exposed at the surface. From the civil engineering point of view, the structural geology is very important branch of geology, next only to petrology. This is so, petrology gives the details of textures, primary structures and minerals of rocks which contribute to the original or inherent physical properties of rocks which are of civil engineering importance. For example, strength, durability, color, appearance and workability. And the structural geology, on the other hand, gives the details about how these inherent properties of rocks get modified due to presence of secondary structures, making them either suitable or unsuitable for civil engineering works, particularly as site rocks for the purpose of dam foundation, tunneling, reservoir location, lying roads or railway tracks. The failure of St. Francis Dam and the Austrian Dam may be recollected in this context to understand the adverse influence of structures over civil engineering projects. The structural geology is the study of factors such as origin, occurrence, classification, types, and effects of various secondary structures like folds, faults, joints, rock cleavage, and unconformities. All these structures are those which develop and occur in rock after their formation and are different from those primary structures such as bedding and vesicular structures which develop in rocks at the time of their formation itself. So now we will see those geological structures one by one. So first we will discuss about the outcrop. So any geological formation exposed on the surface is called an outcrop. It is also used as a general term to refer to exposed folds, faults, joints, etc. The shape and width of the outcrop of inclined bed depends upon the direction and amount of its dip and the surface slope of the region. Next is strike and dip. So first we will discuss about the strike. So if a horizontal line is drawn on an inclined bedding plane, it will run in the direction at right angles to the dip direction and represents the strike or strike direction of a bedding plane. So strike and dip are always at right angles to each other. So we will discuss about a dip now. So here in the diagram we can see the dip direction, and here the strike direction is perpendicular to the dip direction. Now we will see about the dip. So if the beds are tilted during uplift, they occur as beds inclined in some direction. Such beds are said to be dipping, and their position in space can be accurately described by mentioning the direction in which they are inclined and the angle they make with the horizontal. The angle that a bed makes with the horizontal is called its dip or amount of dip, and the direction in which it dips is called the dip direction. The attitude of a bed is therefore completely described by giving its dip direction and the amount of dip in degrees or as a gradient. For example, 5 degree towards east or 1 in 10 towards north, etc. So just as bedding planes are horizontal in case of horizontal beds, they are inclined in case of inclined beds. In fact, it is only by observing the bedding planes that it is known whether the beds are horizontal or dipping, and when the dip of beds is described, it is actually the dip of bedding planes. So here this diagram explains everything over here. So here this direction shows the dip direction. These are the bedding planes, this is the horizontal, and these bedding planes are inclined at this angle. So this angle is nothing but a amount of dip, so which will be given in degrees or as a gradient. And here to this deep direction there is a strike. Strike is exactly perpendicular to the deep direction here, and here it represents the strike direction. The next geological structure is folds. So the folds are one of the most common geological structures found in rocks. So when a set of horizontal layers are subjected to compressive forces, they bend either upwards or downwards. Here this image represents the bending of folds in upward as well as in downward direction. So the bends noticed in the rocks are called as folds. So the folds are described variously as wavy or arch-like or curved or undulatory or warping appearances found in rocks. They are also called flexures or buckling phenomena of rocks. Generally they occur in series. In nature, folds found in rocks have a great range of magnitude in terms of their length and breadth. At one extreme they may be very small, that is a fraction of an inch across and a few inches in length. At the other extreme they may be a few miles across and several miles long. The radius of curvature of fold is small compared to its wavelength and amplitude. So in terms of their nature also, folds may occur as single local bends, that is monoclines, or may occur repeatedly and intricately folded according to the tectonic history of the region. So now we will see the different parts of a fold. So the limbs, crust, trough, axial plane, axis, wavelength and plunge, which are the important parts of a fold. Here we can see in the diagram. So we will see those parts one by one. So limbs or flanks. So these are the sides of a fold. There are two limbs for every fold. So here suppose if we consider this as a one fold, so here this is the one limb and this is the other limb. Okay, so there are two limbs for every fold and one limb common to the adjacent fold. So here we can say that if these are the two adjacent folds, so here this one limb is common for these two adjacent folds. Next is crust and trough. So the curved portion of a fold at the top and bottom are called crust and trough respectively. So here this is the fold. So here the top portion is called as a crust and here this is the downward fold. So here the bottom part of this curve, bottom point of this curve is called as a trough. So in general these are smoothly bent, but in chevron folds these are sharp and angular. Some geologists refer to crust and trough as hinges. Okay, next is axial plane. So this is the imaginary plane which divides a fold into two equal halves. So here you can see these axial planes. So this is the imaginary plane which divides the fold into equal halves. So it passes through either the crust or the trough, that is in between the limbs. So depending upon the nature of the fold, the axial plane may be vertical, horizontal or inclined. In case of symmetrical fold that we are going to discuss later, the axial plane divides the fold into exactly two equal halves. But in asymmetrical fold, the two halves will be only nearly equal. Like a bedding plane, the axial plane also can be expressed by strike and dip. Next is axis. So there is a trace of intersection between the axial plane and the crust of the fold or trough of the fold. So depending on the nature of the fold, it may be inclined or horizontal or vertical. So when it is inclined, the angle between the axis and the horizontal plane is called as a plunge or pitch. In general, an axis is undulatory and its height changes along the trend of the fold. Next is wavelength. So the distance between the successive crust or trough is called as a wavelength. So these are the various parts of the fold. So now we will discuss about the classification and different types of the folds. So based on different principle, the folds are variously classified. Usually folds are classified on the basis of symmetrical character, upward or downward bend, occurrence of plunge, uniformity of bed thickness, and behavior of the fold pattern with depth. So we will see the classification and types of folds based on these different principles one by one. So the first is anticline and syncline folds. So when the beds are bent upwards, so here in the diagram we can see if the beds are bent upward, the resulting fold is called as a anticline. This fold is convex upwards, so naturally in such a fold the older beds occur towards the concave side. In a simple case, the limbs of anticline slope in opposite direction with reference to its axial plane. So this is the anticline and these are the limbs. So these proceeds in opposite direction to each other with reference to the axial plane. But when the anticline is refolded, the inclined character of limb will be complicated. The syncline is just opposite to anticline in its nature, that is when the beds are bent downward. So consider this portion of the diagram. So when the beds are bent downwards, the resulting fold is called syncline. This fold is convex downwards. So in this the younger beds occur towards the concave side, and in a simple type of syncline, its limbs deep towards each other with reference to the axial plane. So these limbs are deeping towards each other with reference to this axial plane. Then symmetrical and asymmetrical folds. So when the axial plane divides a fold into two equal halves in such a way that one half is the mirror image of another, then such fold is called a symmetrical fold. So here in the diagram we can see, suppose if we consider this fold and this as the axial plane. So here the axial plane, here this is cutting this fold into exactly two equal halves. So this kind of fold is called as a symmetrical fold. And if the two halves are not mirror images, then the fold is called as asymmetrical fold. So here this second diagram represents the asymmetrical fold. So here we can say the direction of bending of these folds. So if we cut this in half at the from the crust or trough, so the two portions are not symmetrical, these two portions are not the mirror image of each other, then such kind of fold is called as a asymmetrical fold. So if the compressive forces responsible for folding are not of the same magnitude, the asymmetrical folds are formed. Then plunging and non-plunging folds. The plunge of a fold has already been described as the inclination of the fold axis to the horizontal plane. So based on this, that is whether the axis of fold is inclined or horizontal, that is with or without plunge, the folds are grouped as plunging folds or non-plunging folds. In geological maps, when strike lines are drawn for both the limbs, for a non-plunging fold, they will mutually parallel, and for a plunging fold, they will be either converging or diverging, but not parallel. On a horizontal plane, the outcrops of non-plunging and plunging fold appear as shown in the diagram. Next is open and closed folds. So depending on the intensity of deformation, the beds of the fold may or may not have uniform thickness. So if the thickness of beds is uniform throughout the fold, then it is called as open fold. And on the other hand, in a fold, if the beds are thinner in the limb portion and thicker at crust and trough, such a fold is called as a closed fold. So the plastic movement of material from the limbs to the crust and troughs result in the formation of closed folds. Similar and parallel folds. So based on whether the shape of folds remain the same or is altered with depth, folds are grouped as similar or parallel folds. So in case of similar folds, the shape or pattern of folds remain the same at depth also. But in case of parallel folds, the crust and trough becomes pointed or angular. So in this way, based on the principle, a fold may be described as a non-plunging similar, non-plunging symmetrical, non-plunging open anticline, etc. Next is overturn fold. So usually in simple fold, the limbs show the order of superposition. But when one of the limb is overturned, the order of superposition means successively younger bits overlie the other bits. So the order of superposition of bits in that limb will be in reverse order, and such a fold is called an overturn fold. Okay, so here in the diagram we can see the overturn fold. Next is chevron folds. Okay, usually the crust and trough of beds are smoothly curved, but some folds have sharply bent angular crust and troughs. So such folds are known as chevron folds. So here this image represents the chevron type of fold. Isoclinal folds. So usually the folds have inclined limbs, that is, the limb will be mutually diverging or converging with reference to axial planes. But in some folds, the limbs will be mutually parallel to a great extent. Such folds are called isoclinal folds. So these folds may be vertical, inclined, or horizontal. The horizontal isoclinal folds are called recumbent folds. The inclined and recumbent isoclinal folds are naturally overturn folds also. The next type is fan folds. So usually in simple anticlines, the limbs dip away from one another, and in simple synclines, they dip towards each other. But in the case of fan folds, this trend is just opposite. That is, in anticlines, the fan folds, the limb dip towards each other with reference to their axial plane. In syncline of this kind, the limbs dip away from each other. As the term suggests, these folds are fan shaped. Then domes and basins. So usually a fold will have two distinct limbs, but some folds do not have any such specific limbs and appear as beds locally pushed up or down. That is, their shapes appear as domes or basins. So in a dome, which resembles an upper hemisphere, the dips are found in all sides from the common central top point. Therefore, this is the type of anticline. Whereas in the basin, which is like a bowl, these slopes are just opposite. That is, the dips are found towards a common central bottom point from all the sides. So this is a type of a syncline. So these are the various types of folds based on the different principles. And now we will see the causes and effects of folding. So most of the important folds, as we have discussed, are due to tectonic causes, but a few folds of a minor type are due to non-tectonic causes. So mainly the compressive and shear type of tectonic forces are responsible for the folding phenomena. The igneous intrusions of viscous magmas such as laccoliths and lapoliths. So we have discussed what is laccolith and lapolith in the previous video of igneous rocks. So such laccoliths and lapoliths also contribute for folding. The non-tectonic causes like landslides, creeping, differential compaction, isostatic settling, and glaciation also are responsible for some folds. So these are the minor in terms of frequency of occurrence and magnitude. So when a folded area is affected by weathering and erosion, the interesting topographic features are produced, like immediately after folding, anticlines by virtue of their upward bending appear as hills, and synclines due to downward warping appears as valleys. So during folding in the crust portions, the geological formations are subjected to tensional forces and hence numerous features appear there. Because of these fractures, the crust portions are eroded quickly, leading to conspicuous degradation locally. On the other hand, trough portions are highly compressed and hence offer greater resistance to erosion. Therefore, they stand out in the long run at a greater elevation, with the adjacent part degrade fast. Of course, it is true that the tensional forces prevail in outer parts of synclines too, but they are not only enclosed by other formations but also not exposed to surface for erosion. Hence, they remain less affected. The net result of this response to erosion is that the anticlines will change over valleys while synclines change over to hills. So this paradoxical phenomena is popularly expressed as anticlinal valleys and synclinal hills. The anticlinal valleys are typical examples of inliers and the synclinal hills are example of outliers. So inliers are the areas where older formations are surrounded by younger formations, whereas the outliers are opposite to inliers. That is, in them the younger strata are surrounded outwardly by successively older strata. So apart from folding and faulting, valley erosion too can produce outliers and inliers. So after the folds, we are going to discuss the next geological feature as faults. So from the civil engineering point of view, faults are the most unfavorable and undesirable geological structures at the site for any given purpose. That is, for location of reservoirs, as foundation site for construction of dams, important bridges or huge buildings, for tunneling, for laying roads, railway tracks, etc. This is because faults considerably weaken the rocks in addition to other harmful effects and render the sites in which they occur as unfavorable places for all constructional purposes. Further, as long as the faults are active, the site is unstable and susceptible to upward, downward or sideward movement along the fault plane, thereby making the plane highly hazardous for foundation purposes. Therefore, by virtue of the harm they are capable of causing, faults are necessarily investigated with a special care in dealing with any major construction. The tensional features develop in beds when they are subjected to tensional forces. Then a bed is divided in two parts by the fissure, and one part may move vertically downwards along the fissure related to the other part under the action of gravity. So such fissure along which relative movement has taken place is called as a fault. The plane along which movement has taken place is called as a fault plane, which may be either vertical or inclined. And when it is vertical, the fault is called as a vertical fault, and when it is inclined, then it is called as a inclined fault. The side on which beds have slipped down is called as a down throw side, and the opposite side the up throw side. The vertical distance through which beds have slipped down is called the amount of down throw, which can be found out in a section by measuring the vertical distance in the position of any bedding plane on two sides of the fault plane. In a field or in a map, a fault is seen as a line along which all outcrops end abruptly and are more or less shifted laterally if they are continued on the other side. So now we will discuss about the different parts of a fault. So here we can see the different parts like fault plane, footwall and hanging wall, then slip and heave and throw. So first we will discuss about the fault plane. So this is the plane along which the adjacent blocks were relatively displaced. So in other words, this is the fractured surface on either side of which the rocks had moved past one another. Next is footwall and hanging wall. So when the fault plane is inclined, the faulted block which lies below the fault plane is called as a footwall, and the other block which rests above the fault plane is called as a hanging wall. Here we can see this is the footwall which is lying below the fault plane, and this is the hanging wall which is lying above the fault plane. And in the case of vertical faults, naturally the faulted blocks cannot be described as footwall or hanging wall. Next is a slip. So the displacement that occurs during faulting is called the slip. The total displacement is known as the net slip. So this may be along the strike direction or the deep direction, or along both, that is strike and deep. Next is heave and throw. So the horizontal component of displacement is called heave, and the vertical component of displacement is called as a throw. So now we will discuss about the classification and types of faults. So like faults, the faults also have been classified on the basis of different principles. Those are type of displacement along the fault plane, relative moment of footwall and hanging wall, type of slip involved, the mutual relation of attitudes of the fault plane and adjacent beds, inclination of the fault plane, and mode of occurrence of the fault, etc. So we will see the classification based on these different principles one by one. So based on the principle of types of displacement along the plane, we will see the different types of fault. So based on this principle, faults are divisible into translational faults and rotational faults. So in the case of translational faults, the type of displacement of the footwall with reference to the hanging wall is uniform along the fault plane, and in the case of rotational fault, it varies from place to place, that is the displacement gradually increases or decreases. In rotational faults, the footwall and the hanging wall appear to have been hinged or fixed at a place where no displacement occurs at all, and on either side of it, the displacement gradually changes. For this reason, they are also described as a hinge faults or scissors faults. Then based on the principle of relative moment of footwall and hanging wall, so in the case of inclined faults, if the hanging wall goes down with reference to the footwall, it is called normal fault or gravity fault. These terms are very appropriate because the hanging wall is normally expected to move or slide down along the slope of the fault plane under the influence of gravity. If the kind of relative displacement of the hanging wall is opposite to this, the fault is called as a reverse fault or thrust fault. So these terms are also appropriate because in such faults, the hanging wall seems to have been thrust upwards against the slope of the fault plane, and therefore the type of displacement is the reverse of the normally expected downward movement of the hanging wall under such condition. Then we will see the types of faults based on the types of slip involved. So slip has been already described as the displacement along the fault plane. So if the displacement is only along the strike direction of a fault plane, such a fault is described as a strike slip fault. On the other hand, if the displacement is completely along the deep direction of a fault plane, it is called as a deep slip fault. If the displacement occurs partly along the strike direction and partly along the deep direction, that is the direction of net slip is oblique to both the strike direction and deep direction. So if it occurs partly along the strike direction and partly along the deep direction of the fault plane, such a fault is called as a oblique slip fault. Then based on the mode of occurrence, based on the mode of occurrence or pattern in the field, the different types of faults are radial faults, en-echelon faults, and arcuate or peripheral faults. So the radial faults we will see first. So when a set of faults occur on the surface and appear to be radiating from a common point, they are called as radial faults. And the n echelon faults, so these refers to a series of minor faults which appear to be overlapping one another. And the arcuate or peripheral faults, so these also refer to the set of relatively minor faults which have curved outcrops and are arranged in a peripheral manner enclosing more or less a circular area. The next geological feature we are going to discuss is joints. The rock formations such as lava flow or a sedimentary bed or a granite batholith do not occur in nature as large, continuous, unbroken masses, but are split up into smaller bodies by a number of discontinuities. So among these, the commonest are joints. So the joints are divisional planes along which no movement has taken place and are contraction cracks. The igneous and metamorphic rocks contract as they cool from the high temperatures of their formation, and sedimentary rocks contract when they dry. So this contraction usually sets up a systematic pattern of cracks, and therefore joints occurs as sets of cracks all running in the same direction. So usually there are two sets of joints at right angles to each other. So with a few exceptions such as amygdaloidal basalt which do not develop a regular pattern of jointing, the joints are usually present in all rocks. However, there is a very great variation in their character, the number and spacing. In some rocks they are very closely spaced, splitting up the rock into small chips or blocks. Such rocks are described as closely jointed. In others, they are broadly spaced and fewer, giving larger masses. Such blocks are called broadly jointed. The rocks such as amygdaloidal basalt, in which there are no joints or rocks with very broadly spaced joints, occur in large masses. Such rocks which are free from or contain only a few divisional planes such as joints, bedding planes, planes of schistosity, etc., are described as massive. So the joints are incipient planes of weak cohesion which open up on weathering. Therefore, they are usually open at the surface and close up with depth. Such closed joints which do not show any separation are called tight joints. The subsurface investigations at sites of engineering projects have sometimes shown, as at a Naugam Dam site on the Narmada, that joints may not close up with depth. Such cases are, however, exceptional. Also, when traced laterally, joints are often found to be inconsistent and not interconnected. So now we will discuss the classification of joints based on the different parameters. So first we will see the classification of joints based on the relative attitude of joints. The joints are mainly classified on the basis of their relative attitude and origin. So first we will discuss about the attitude of joints. So this classification is similar to that of faults, wherein the strike direction of a structure is compared with the strike and deep of adjacent strata. So when the joints are parallel to the strike direction or deep direction of adjacent beds, they are called strike joints or deep joints respectively. So if the strike direction of joint is parallel neither to the strike nor deep direction of adjacent beds, then such joints are called oblique joints. If the attitude of joints, that is strike direction, and deep amount, so if this attitude of joint coincides completely with the attitude of adjacent beds, they are called as bedding joints. And if we see the classification based on the origin of joints, so the most of the joints are formed due to either tensional forces or shearing forces. So accordingly they are described as tension joints or shear joints. So the columnar joints which may occur in basalt are typically example of tension joints. Their mode of formation we have already seen under the primary structure of volcanic igneous rock under the igneous petrology video. So the mud cracks are also formed due to tensional forces. So in this case, tensional forces developed due to shrinkage in volume of mud, which in turn was due to the escape of enclosed moisture content on evaporation. The tension joints develop perpendicular to the direction of tensional forces, which pull apart the rock masses. The both columnar joints and mud cracks are polygonal in plan. So, under the influence of erosion in folded areas, the crust and trough portions are highly fractured. Since these V-shaped fractures are formed due to tensional forces, they also represent the tension joints. The shear joints develop in those contexts where shearing forces prevail. The faults and limbs of folds are the places where shearing forces occur and create shear joints. So further, the joints are also sometimes described as longitudinal joints or transverse joints, depending on whether they are parallel to or across some large scale features such as mountain ranges in a given region. Next is unconformity. So when after deposition a conformable series is uplifted into dry land, it is exposed to denudation, that is removal by the action of atmospheric agent and water. So when denudation has gone on for some time, the rocks of the series will be carved out into hills and valleys, giving an irregular land surface. So when submergence again takes place, deposition will again start after a break, and another conformable series will be deposited on the eroded surface of the series first deposited. Then the surface separation of the two series will not be a plane surface but will be an irregular surface, denoting that there has been a break in the sedimentation. So such a break in deposition is called an unconformity, and the younger series, that is the series deposited after the break, is said to overlie unconformably the older series, that is the series that was first deposited. So in a conformable series, each bed can come in contact with only one bed below and one bed above. But in the case of an unconformity, the oldest bed of a younger series is deposited on an eroded surface of the older series, and hence at the bottom it is in contact with more than one bed of the older series. So now we will see the terms stratification and lamination related to bedding planes. So first we will discuss about the stratification. So these sedimentary rocks are always deposited in layers. Each layer is called as a bed or stratum, and this property of sedimentary rock to get deposited in layers is called as a stratification or bedding. Next is lamination. So sometimes the thickness of layers in sedimentary rock is very small. The layers may be just paper thin. So such layers are called as lamina, and this property is called as a lamination. So in this video of structural geology, we have discussed about the different geological structures, the formation of different geological structures, their classification, their types based on the different principles. So in this video we have covered most of the geological features. Thank you.